Well, good morning. Thank you very much for joining me on this video. We're taking a look at some alternate opportunities for real estate investment in addition to the ones we cut our teeth on. We looked at originally at a very simple plan, and we built it around buying single-family homes, semi-detached, duplexes, triplexes, condos, and we branched onto commercial. But there's some other ones that you may want to consider that are more specialty. And today I want to take a look at short-term vacation rentals. One of the things that COVID did, as you recall, was curtailed travel. You couldn't fly to Europe. You couldn't fly or travel down to the US and certainly not to the Caribbean. And yet people wanted to have holidays. So what happened was people started to look at vacationing in Canada, vacationing in Ontario, and in many cases they took a look at what could they acquire that was close to home. And so COVID really spurred on the recreational property industry in places like Haliburton, Muskoka, Kawarthas, places like Collingwood, and Shirkston and Crystal Beach and so on. And people ended up buying properties in these areas so they could still have holidays and still travel without a problem, without having to rent accommodations that maybe weren't available to the general public. Well, what happened was they discovered that they, for example, had a cottage that now would be primed to be used all summer long, but they normally only had 2 or 3 weeks holiday. So they might have had 5 or 6 weeks when it would be sitting vacant. And they decided maybe we should rent it out in the period of time we're not using it and get some revenue. So what they started to do was they started to rent out these properties on a short-term basis to other people who wanted to vacation in a more localized area. Then as the restrictions of COVID lifted, people expanded but continued doing the same thing. And people would now buy property in, say, Mexico or the Caribbean or Florida or Arizona or maybe even Costa Rica. And they discovered that there was still the same situation where there'd be 3 or 4 weeks of the year that they wanted to use it themselves, and there was a whole chunk of time the property was sitting in paradise and being unused. And so it would become an opportunity to rent out on a short-term basis. And it can be very, very lucrative. One of the advantages, of course, is that you get paid in U.S. funds. And we know the difference in the spread between Canadian funds and U.S. funds, and it's nice to have a steady income in U.S. funds. Also, we found that a lot of people, when they bought a property in Mexico or in the Caribbean or in Florida, would buy more than one. And they would use the one and rent it out additional time, but it worked out so well, and they already had the mechanism in place that they would do a second one and a third one. In fact, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was talking to a chap who told me he just bought 3 properties in Florida. He has no intention of spending any time himself using them, but he said, I want to have a U.S. bank account, I want to have U.S. funds coming in, and actually, the return on investment, generally speaking, in the U.S. is better than in Canada. You get a better cap rate, and you get better cash flow. So it makes a lot of sense. How do you run it? Well, you've got to think about it as though you're running a hotel. What I mean by that is you're going to provide furnishings. It's got to be furnished. You're going to provide towels and bedding and cutlery and plates and serving dishes and so on. It's got to be fully occupational like an all-suites hotel. It also needs to have fixed check-in and check-out times, because if the check-out is, for example, 11 o'clock and the check-in is 3 o'clock, and you don't want to lose a day's rent, then you give yourself a 3 or 4 hour window to get it cleaned up, get it prepared, get the sheets and towels washed and everything ready for the new person coming in. And you'd also want to have it with a remote locking mechanism, so it isn't a problem getting keys into the hands of the new person coming in. You just remotely change the lock code, let them know what the code is. While they're there, they use that code, then you change it again after they leave. There are support systems in place to do this. It's become very sophisticated. Of course, Airbnb is the one that kind of led the charge. Now we've got Virgo. There's a number of other ones that do the same thing. They will advertise for you. They will market it for you. And they get a following of people who go to those particular sites looking for vacation property. They charge a modest fee to the property owner. they charge a higher fee to the user than the property owner. So it isn't really a big bite out of the revenue that you're getting in. Also, they make provisions for a built-in cleaning fee. So you tell them what the cleaning fee is going to be, and when you hire a cleaner, that's offset by what you charge the people who are using it. There's also an opportunity for a built-in security deposit. And after your cleaner comes in and has a look at the property and makes sure nothing's stolen, nothing's broken, it's in good condition, they get the security deposit back. And one of the other interesting things that these services have is they have a two-way evaluation system. You, as a property owner, evaluate the guest as to whether they were a good guest or whether you'd recommend them or not. They, in turn, evaluate you as the property owner and the property itself, whether it was a good experience, whether they would recommend it. And you get a 4-star, 5-star, or number rating or whatever. And when somebody's looking to rent and they go on one of these sites, they take a look at these remarks scoring, and it helps them decide whether they want to rent yours or somebody else's. And it gives you the opportunity to check out a potential guest and find out whether or not the experience with other property owners was positive or negative. And in fact, if the people have been very problematic, they'll get blocked from the support system, the Airbnb or the Virgo, totally, and they won't be part of the mix any longer. Also, there are management companies who are dedicated to look after these things. Management companies that will handle placing, scheduling, handle the cleaning, handle everything. And when I say scheduling, by the way, you just block out the week or weeks you want to use it. Those are not in the mix, and otherwise they are. You can stipulate a minimum of 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, or 1 day is fine. You can make whatever stipulations you want, whatever works for you. When you're looking at acquiring a property that you want to enjoy yourself, but you also want to rent out as a short-term vacation property, there's a number of things you want to take into consideration. The first thing is, how many people will it accommodate? That's the most important criteria somebody's looking for. If it's only going to accommodate, for argument's sake, 2 people, they'll probably opt for a hotel instead, an all-suite hotel that's going to have an indoor pool and some amenities that perhaps you don't have. But if it'll accommodate 6 or 8 people, it's way better than getting 3 or 4 hotel rooms. It gives them the comfort of living room. It gives them the kitchen and a lot of things that is a benefit. Then you want to take a look at the location of it. Is it, for example, on water? Is it in a high tourist area? And is it close to the sites? If you're going to have a property in Niagara Falls, is it going to be close to Clifton Hill, where all the attractions are? If it's going to be in Niagara-on-the-Lake, is it close to the old town of Niagara-on-the-Lake? You're wanting to pick something that's going to be of demand for people. And then you're going to take a look at the amenities. What do you actually have to offer? Does it have a pool? Does it have a hot tub? Does it have an entertainment center? Does it have a pool table? And a patio outside with patio furniture and so on? What kind of stuff do you have for them that would cause somebody to look at it in the picture and say, hey, I'd like to stay there? I want to caution you about one thing, though. If before you go out and buy a property and decide you're going to set up an Airbnb, be careful of zoning. If it's a tourist area zone, you're probably okay. If it's a commercial zone, you're probably okay. But a lot of municipalities, like St. Catharines, for example, have enacted bylaws to limit your availability of doing that. Neighbors aren't thrilled to having somebody else come in every 2 or 3 days next door, and sometimes having a party, lots of people in there. And so the city, for example, in St. Catharines, has limited it that you have to dwell in the property yourself and can only make a certain portion of it available. So be careful about the zoning before you get into that. Cash flow. It depends on what you have to offer and where it's located, the things we talked about, and then it's going to be comparable to the prices for hotels. You can take a look at what the hotels charge and what you can charge viably for the product that you're offering. And as I said, it can be very lucrative. I know of people who have a small little 1-bedroom apartment in their house down the basement, and they rent it out, and they maybe get, let's say if they get $100 a day and they rent it the whole month, they're getting 3 times what they'd get if they rented it out as an apartment. I have an acquaintance in Burlington who decided he was going to get in the Airbnb business, and he knew that the Picton area in the Bay of Quinte was a very popular tourist site, and so he bought a 3-bedroom bungalow in Picton. It wasn't on the water, it wasn't out by the sandbanks, it was just in town. He renovated it, made it up modern standards, put 2 bedrooms in the basement, and he rents it out, and he gets between $800 and $1,000 a day. So and he's booked up all summer, every day. So if he just rents it out for the 2 months of the summer only, he's going to pick up between $50,000 and $60,000 rent. That's twice what he'd get renting it out, and he's got another 10 months to use it himself and rent it out and so on. So it can be very, very lucrative. There are pros and there are cons to this type of real estate investment. Very different than owning a duplex or a triplex or a semi-detached. One of the advantages is it gives you an automatic dwelling to use yourself. And maybe as you move closer to retirement, you may want to use it all winter long, if it happens to be, for example, in Arizona or it happens to be in Florida. It gives you, as we've talked about already, a constant flow availability of U.S. cash, and that's really a plus. And it gives you an excellent return. Just in general, return in the U.S. tends to be better than return in Canada on a property you acquire on its cap rate. And so much more with your short-term vacation rentals, you just get a much better return. Some of the disadvantages, you have to understand there's high turnover. You got somebody else moving in every 2, 3, 4 days. As a landlord, I certainly wouldn't want that and have to rent it out to a new tenant in a short term. I want tenants that are going to be there long term. There's more wear and tear, and the more people you deal with, the more likelihood you're going to find a bad one sooner or later, so you've got that exposure. There's also the potential for misuse. When you got 5, 6, 7, 8 people coming into an area, they could be partying, they could be doing all kinds of things. And in the early days, they had problems with drugs and sort of things that were happening until these management companies really started to clamp down. It can be high maintenance. You can get a certain amount of damage that's done. And sure, you can go after the damage deposit, but you're going to have to look after the change of furniture or the change of cutlery and plates and so on. And another one that's kind of interesting, but I talked to a lady who had one of these in Florida, and she said the biggest problem she ran into was friends and family. She said they expect it, they don't want to pay, they expect it for free, and they feel like you shouldn't have to abide by the rules. She said, I will have family or friends down there, and I've got it rented out the next day. The people are in the driveway ready to come in, and the people who are my friends who are using it haven't even started to pack up yet. They figure, oh, well, it's not a big problem. She says friends and family cause huge problem. And the other thing is that bear in mind it's not local. If you are renting out a triplex, it's way easier to manage it, even if you're delegating everything out, if you're there. Because there's the odd time you're going to have to go and inspect something or meet a tenant, and it's just awkward when it's thousands of miles away or even hundreds of miles away. So you got to take that into consideration. There's pros and there's cons, but it can be a very, very, very lucrative venture for you in terms of real estate investment, and I want to make sure you're aware of it. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. Talk to you again next week.